be there with all of you talking about memes and the pandemic and everything. But anyway, we'll do the most we can. And thank you all participants as well for joining me today. Okay, I'm going to talk about COVID-19 memes. My main objective in this paper is to provide a cognitive explanation to why COVID-19 memes were so pervasive and necessary, so healing, and so massively shared during the 2020 lockdown, especially the lockdown time between March and May 2020, but in the pandemic in general. Also, you know, to propose basically that the key to COVID-19 meme humor does not often lie in the explicit interpretation of the meme, regardless of whether the meme is verbal or text only or visual or multimodal, etc. Consequently, it's also like to show that effectiveness of COVID-19 meme humor relies on certain non-coded elements beyond the interpretation of meme discourse, and that's what I'm basically going to concentrate on today. And I will also claim that these elements may converge, may overlap, may complement one another in obtaining the desired effects and eventual audience validation. And finally, I will end up by claiming or suggesting that these elements focus on sharing propositional or non-propositional information through memes, rather than simply sending the memes and sharing them on messaging applications or social media, etc. Right, so this is the prototypical act of meme-mediated communication according to cyberpragmatics. So we have a user, what we call a sender user, that is framed in a number of what I call user-related contextual constraints, okay, including age, sex, personality, mood, the culture the user is in. So all that, all this is having an impact on what kind of meme is shared, with what frequency, with which expectations, with which audience, etc., etc., etc. This user sends a meme to an audience, and the meme is sent through an interface that again also has or exhibits interface-related constraints, depending on what they call interface affordances are, what kind of context the interface provides for this kind of interaction. And there's obviously a difference between whether the meme is shared on a messaging app or on Twitter or on Facebook, and also the kind of interaction that is expected or even afforded, okay? And then we have the audience, so that again also exhibits a number of user-related constraints, but also importantly, the idea that there's a hell of a difference between sharing a meme with a single person or a single user than to share it with a whole massive audience, especially in terms of mutuality, what expectations of mutuality of information there is. Okay, so this audience will process the meme for relevance, obtaining an explicit interpretation with the aid of contextual information, and perhaps also get some implicated conclusions by linking the information from explicitly obtained from the meme with further contextual information. In an ideal situation, through this parallel adjustment of explicit contextual information, implicated conclusions, they will get some non-propositional effects in terms of humor, and normally the meme also provokes or triggers some further meme-based interaction that again might also produce non-propositional effects, not necessarily related to humor, also effects in terms of connection, mutuality, awareness of mutuality of information, feeling of reciprocity, acknowledgement, etc., etc., etc. Right. So this is basically the schema of what meme communication is like according to cyberpragmatics. But my point today is that it would be reductive or limited or even naive to try to approach COVID memes simply using this schema that I'm showing you now. It wouldn't explain why they were so pervasive, so massively shared, why people relied on that for a good number of effects on their propositional effects on emotions, feelings, etc., etc. And basically because COVID memes are took place in a pandemic that brought about a radical change in what we can call society-centered frames in terms of what life used to be like, or should be like, or lifestyle that we all knew about. So basically, my proposal today is that apart from this basic schema of meme communication, we have to approach COVID memes in terms of a number of elements that are not coded in the meme or do not even belong to the explicit interpretation of the meme. So I'm going to propose the analysis of 5 of those whose labels you can see now. Firstly, the idea of therapeutic humor, frame-based humor. Then at the bottom, talking about contextual information, what they call joy of mutual manifestness, also fatigue effects in terms of non-propositional effects, and finally, the mutuality of implicated premises reinforced. All of that is supposed to be not part of the explicit interpretation of the meme, but plays a major role in understanding why COVID memes were so massively shared, so necessary, and so effective in alleviating all the pain that we were going through during lockdown and these hard pandemic times. So the first one is basically the idea of that has been researched and studied a lot in the past. The idea that humor is therapeutic, that it has a general role in when coping with illness and stress, and also the idea that we can use self-deprecating humor as part of the attempt to laugh at challenges faced by society, and a number of effects in the alleviation of collective suffering. So that's basically, I would say, an umbrella non-propositional feeling-based framework. And there's a lot of bibliography talking about that, talking about humor alleviating stress, mitigating suffering, dissipating feelings of anxiety, granting people a sense of power and control in helpless situations, or as a response to stressful situations, managing stress, maintaining emotional well-being. Levin, 2004, talks about coping with threatening experiences, negative emotions, etc. Aslan, in a forthcoming paper, talks about laughing at our own shortcomings and difficult circumstances. And also the Amici, 2020, talks about communicating emotions and creating a mental state as a social lubricant. So as you can see, as you can imagine, this is also very much at work in COVID times, in which we were also suffering stressful situations, we were feeling helpless, etc., etc. So we cannot fight the pandemic. If we are suffering, let's laugh about it. So we have changes of plan for Easter. We cannot travel, but we can all laugh at the impossibility of traveling. Okay. Or here, painting a mandala to relax a bit. We are all stressed with this situation, but let's laugh a bit about that. This is in the middle. You have this idea of self-deprecation. Laughing at the Spanish inability to cope with the pandemic, and specifically the information about building a hospital, just like the Chinese did in 10 days to build a hospital to fight coronavirus. And you can see the Spanish way of working, lazy people, one of them working, the others watching. And stay at home, but conduct normal lives. We cannot commute. We cannot use the underground. Okay, let's laugh about it. Secondly, we have the idea of frame construction. And I have, well, you will see in a minute, dealt with the idea that some humor is not based on the interpretation of the utterances. It's based on manipulating the construction of a situation to fit the comprehension of the joke or of the humorous text. But what I am interested in today is the incongruity with broader frames on our lifestyle, or what lifestyle used to be like or took for granted before COVID radically altered that. Okay, so we had some effects, non-propositional effects, in the strengthening of what's lost due to COVID. So we have this. I had this in previous research, this differentiation between frame-based inferences and their application on humor. Basically, the inferential building up of a suitable situation to interpret the discourse appropriately. And also the idea that this frame is often constructed automatically, stereotypically, normally beyond the hearer's conscious awareness. And you have an example on the right-hand side about a man who's dying on his deathbed, and his wife is maintaining a vigil by his side, and she's holding his fragile hand, and tears raining down her face. And it's so we build up this situation of dying man and loving wife by his side, and then at the end of the joke he wants to confess about sleeping with people. So at the end of the joke, when she says, "I know, that's why I poisoned you," we get an incongruity with all the situation we had been constructing so far in the joke. Okay, and so we have this idea of playing with the construction of a suitable situation that fits the joke, or for the understanding of the joke. As a contrast, we have more discourse-based inferences that play with the actual interpretation of the text of the joke, including reference assignment, disambiguation, concept adjustment, etc. You've got two examples on the right-hand side. The first one playing with the different meanings of balance, and the second one playing with a syntactic arrangement and also latent multiplicity of meanings of kiss her back. Okay, so the first one, frame-based inferences, are the ones that I think are most important for COVID-19 meme humor. Although we can find a specific, or let's call it local frame constructions like these ones, like these memes, for example, me estoy volviendo loca sin ir al gimnasio, I'm going crazy without going to the gym, and this week it's been 5 years already, or day 26 of lockdown, I set up a gym at home, I'm not going either. So we have this expectation, frame construction about the inability to go to the gym during lockdown, but attempts to compensate for that at home. But then the end of these memes is absolutely incongruous with what situation we have been setting up. But however, what I think is more interesting for in terms of frame construction is not this local specific frame construction, but broader society-centered frame constructions or assumptions about lifestyle that were absolutely incongruous with what the life we were forced to have during COVID. So we have this kind of meme, which is absolutely absurd, like first exit from home after lockdown, or I'm going to the supermarket, anything you need, or can you tell me why you returned so late from the balcony, or this picture of Madrid-Coruña highway after 856 days. Okay, so the one, especially these memes, what they do is they clash with absurdly with broad general frames of our lifestyle, or what life should be like or used to be like before COVID started. Okay, you have another example here. At the top of the meme, the guy is a lazy git, but then in the COVID imposed information on the frame, we have to replace it with the guy is a responsible citizen because staying at home is good to prevent the spread of the virus. Okay, and also I think we can rearrange my proposal in which I presented in a 2019 conference and then published in 2021, the idea of second order incongruity resolution in certain memes. So the idea in that terminology was initially was centered initially on those frequent memes that have a film still or an image of a film or a TV series, in which my idea is that although that image is not totally incongruous with the accompanying text, it is incompatible with the initial context where this photograph, this image was initially produced. So we have this example of the actor The Rock, and the accompanying text is not, I know it's a bit exaggerated, but it's not totally incongruous with what with the gesture he's producing, but it is incongruous with the initial context of the film or TV where this gesture was actually produced. Okay, so we can do that also with pandemic memes. For example, this meme. They forecast rain for Friday. It's going to ruin a weekend. We have this idea of the pre-pandemic lifestyle that weekends are normally the time of the week to enjoy ourselves, to go out, have fun. We don't normally like the weather to be bad if we are going outside. But then we have this imposed pandemic lifestyle that people cannot leave their homes due to the pandemic. So we have this initial context in which the meme would not be incongruous at all. There wouldn't be any meme frame incongruity, but it is because it is now reintroduced in a different context, in the pandemic context. So we have this clash of frames here. Okay, right. Thirdly, we have the idea of the joy of mutuality. Okay, the mutuality of information is assumed in COVID humor, and the idea that also this mutuality information is revealed through the interaction taking place through COVID memes. Okay, so obviously having some effects in that joy of mutual manifestness, the joy of sharing information. This term of joy of mutual manifestness I used initially in my research on stand-up comedy monologues. The idea is that people attending the venue come to the venue with a personal store of beliefs, ideas, and mental representations, and also a more or less faithful or more or less similar version of what they call the cultural or the social information, or what culture is like, or the social society is like. So I noticed that many of the monologues by comedians were not humorous per se, or were not humorous in themselves. So the idea is that stand-up comedians, very often what they do is they remind the audience of the collective status of certain mental representations, or they force a collective status of previously thought to be individual beliefs stored on each individual's minds. So as a consequence of this, there is a collective awareness of mutuality, or of collective status of information that triggers a joy of mutual manifestness, a joy of mutuality, a joy of sharing this information. That, I mean, not time to talk about that, but I also applied Sperber's idea of epidemiology of representations, the idea that this kind of representation spreads like a virus across the venue, and that's a specific thing. A good example of this is the monologues I analyzed in my 2004 publication, Pragmatics of Humor, Humorous Strategies in Club de la Comedia. In that specific monologues on TV, one of them was silly things we do when we're in love. Okay? So notice on the left how the comedian is reminding the audience that there is pretty much nothing that we do that is actually original or specific, but everything is, everybody does the same thing. So when you're in love, not only do you behave like an idiot, but you also think that you're special, that nobody else in the world that's the things you do. But in fact, what you do is to repeat the same silly things that all the people in love do. And notice on the right-hand side that it says, when you want to pick up a girl for a date or something, and you get into the car, you've got to put on some romantic music. That tape you recorded especially for that occasion, and that you showing off your originality, labeled slow music. Okay. Now, when I read that, I'll be honest with you, I thought I recorded that tape when I was in my 20s. My goodness. So I thought that was, the only difference is that the label was romantic music instead of slow music. So I had this, what Kosinski calls a shock of recognition, the shock of recognizing that what I did was not so original after all. Okay, so that's, that's where the relevance of these society-centered monologues lies. So in the same way, we can. There's been a lot of memes emphasizing the collective awareness or the collective quality of people's behavior, like taking the dog for a walk 38 times in a day, taking advantage of the fact that during lockdown in Spain, people could only leave home to get food or take the dog for a walk, and maybe some people even thought that, okay, I'm going to take advantage and I'll do it myself. I'm so original, and then realizing that everybody does the same with their dogs. Or also the obsession with collecting and buying toilet paper for no reason, and realizing that this is something that everybody did. Okay. Also, this joy of mutual manifestness, of course, this is a broad social issue, but it may also be applied to very specific information that is necessary to understand some memes correctly. For example, this one, breaking news, Morocco intercepts a boat called Patera in Spanish, filled with people from Madrid. So we have this clash of information, background information, that this kind of boats are normally filled with African migrants and not people from Madrid. So, and the resolution coming via COVID-related background information is that people from Madrid will do the utmost to reach their second residencies despite lockdown. So basically this meme will be part of a larger or broader interaction on this, and basically the successful outcome of this interpretation will also lead to this joy of mutual manifestness that I was talking about. Okay. More examples, the sharing collective information about the Chinese, or sharing collective information about problems in couples when dealing, when having to be together all day at home during lockdown. So God forgive me for the times I asked you to get my husband to spend more time with me, or also some specific information about certain generations of people that know the relationship between those objects, or even problems that parents faced having to look after their children all day during lockdown. Okay, so this kind of collective mutuality of information about what we are suffering, what we're going through, information about pain and specific suffering in the couple by parents, etc. I think that's a source of humor, a source of effectiveness of COVID memes beyond their interpretation. Now, fourthly, we have the idea of the fatigue internet, the idea that many discourses today are shared, sent through interfaces, smartphones, etc., to satisfy the user's fatigue needs more than in order to provide users with relevant, interesting, substantive information. Okay, so the idea that COVID memes were mainly used as a way to maintain connections, and with effects, obviously effects in feelings of bonding and membership, etc., etc. This idea of the fatigue internet comes from Vincent Miller, who as early as 2008 said that he found a shift from dialogue and communication, where the point of the network was to facilitate an exchange of substantive content, relevant, interesting content, to a situation where the maintenance of a network itself has become the primary focus. So the communication here now has been subordinated to the role of the simple maintenance of ever-expanding networks and the notion of connected presence. So we are using, increasingly, we are using discourses not to provide people with interesting information, but as an excuse to get feelings of connection, of bonding, of reciprocity, of acknowledgement, of group membership, etc., etc., etc. Now, in my book, Smartphone Communication, that Agnieszka was mentioning in her introduction, I attempt an application of this idea to sharing images on smartphones. Okay, so the idea is that sometimes we produce or we send images to people because we think the image is nice, relevant, interesting in itself. So imagine, for example, this photograph in which the photographer cunningly plays with the sunset as if it was a football. Okay, obviously, if he posts that on Facebook or on Twitter or sends on a messaging app, he or she has expectations of relevance, expectations that there will be some feedback and reactions, and also what I call interactivity trigger, the idea that we post stuff, we post images on social media as a trigger to get comments, reactions, praising things, praising comments, likes, and reactions, etc., and obviously feelings of being connected somehow. So the idea is that in these cases of when the image itself is interesting, is valid, is valuable, we would talk about image referent contiguity, the idea that the referent of the image is relevant in itself. Okay, so that's a kind of image referent contiguity that is relevant, is worth the effort. So, and obviously that it produces effects like photo-based interactions or some feedback on the quality of the photo, and also some non-propositional effects such as feelings of self-worth or impact on self-identity, connection, etc., etc. Now, the problem is now that nowadays people send photos like this, or food pics, or things like I'm having breakfast and send this kind of photograph with the same expectations of reward, but in this case, the relevance of the referent is not good enough, or is not valid enough, is not sufficient to be worth the effort. So the relevance of this kind of sharing of images must be found elsewhere, and this is when my proposal is to talk about relevance of user audience contiguity through the image. The idea that we use the image not because the image is nice, but because the image allows for a feeling of connection or contiguity between the two users, and obviously again with an expectation that this will lead to further interaction triggered by the photo, and then all the range of possible non-propositional effects proposed in the bibliography, including feelings of connected presence or fatigue effects, visual co-presence, presence in the absence, ambient awareness, social capital, group bonding, feelings of membership, feelings of being acknowledged, etc., etc., etc. So the same happens with COVID-19 memes. Okay, they could be on social media like Facebook. For example, this meme on the left was posted in the group Pandemic, and it was nice because it triggered some very nice interaction and feelings of connection. And this one is specifically nice because it also triggered interactions and fostered feelings of reciprocity, jumping to the physical space of connectedness. Now, notice that some of the users are talking about leaving a house plant by the door of some other user who's living not far away in a physical scenario. Okay, and also on the right-hand side, you can see how users acknowledge the importance of this Facebook group. Users ready to help each other out, lucky to have that space for bonding. So that's possible to do that on social media. My opinion, though, is that it's more frequent on messaging apps. You know? The idea that we use COVID-19 memes to to knock on the door of other users' messaging app and as an excuse for further interaction. You got 3 examples there of the meme of the first photo of the Russian vaccine, which is basically vodka, or a video showing the progression in terms of weight before and after the quarantine, and also on the right-hand side, a photograph of the countries that were facing COVID more effectively, and coinciding with the fact that these countries were led by women and not men. So we have all sorts of implications regarding the effectiveness of women leaders or female leaders in dealing with the pandemic. And just all of these memes created, fostered a further interaction, and of course feelings of connected presence, ambient awareness, etc., etc., etc. And finally, the idea of implicated conclusions and implicated premises, how these entail an active role in inference, and also COVID-related implicatures might emphasize shared premises that, of course, produce effects in the mutual awareness of COVID information. Now, if you have a look at this prototypical conversation, like at the vet, in which a man says, "Nice cat, is it male or female?" And the woman answers, "It's 3-colored." And then the guy says, "Oh, female, well, it's a beautiful cat." So in that prototypical analysis, in pragmatics, we would say that there is an implicated premise that all 3-colored cats are female, what we can call broadly contextual information that allows him to get the implicated conclusion that the cat is female. Okay, that's the typical implicature. Now, the crucial thing here, I think, is that the successful outcome of this implicature-based interaction entails not only an expectation of accessibility to this implicated premise, but also the idea that the successful interpretive outcome also reveals this mutual manifestness, this mutuality of information regarding this premise. So similarly, we get this idea in COVID memes, how, for example, the meme on the left, in which the father is talking to the child, "This is not the mask you went to school with this morning." And he says, "No, this one is way cooler. I exchanged mine with Diego, and he exchanged his with Lucas," in which we get all sorts of implicated premises and also an implicated conclusion. But the successful interpretation and further interaction on regarding this meme creates a mutuality of awareness, or an awareness of mutuality, whatever you want to say it, of these implicated premises. Another example is this picture of Seville Fair, in which we have the tents, the typical tents of the Seville Fair, April Fair, but with labels at the top: tobacconist, dry cleaner, hairdressers, with the implicated premises that while in lockdown in Spain, people could only leave the house to go to places for essential activities. During the pandemic, feasts and celebrations such as Seville's Fair, those were prohibited. So we get the implicated conclusion that people in Seville will do the utmost to celebrate the local fair despite explicit prohibition. So in this case, again, we have a vivid feeling of mutuality of information regarding these premises that allow for a correct interpretation in the shape of derivation of implicated conclusions. Okay, so this is basically the 5 elements which are beyond the explicit interpretation of the meme, and that's obviously a qualitative analysis. We could also have a look at, to finish, a possible way of corroborating these quantitatively. We don't have time for much of this, but I'm going to show you this taxonomy of classification of memes that I proposed in 2019, depending on frame or discourse-centered incongruity I told you about before, and the role of text and image in the eventual humorous effect. So we have 7 types The first one is frame-based, in which the image plays no role. So we have these kind of memes in which the image itself doesn't look like playing any part in the interpretation of the meme. Secondly, frame-based memes in which the image aids. Notice that in these three memes, for example, on the left, the angry woman aids in constructing a situation for the text. I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need a man to take care of me. So we build up this situation for the meme, which is utterly invalidated at the bottom when she says, "He better pay for dinner, buy me flowers, open the car door, tell me I'm beautiful, and buy me an engagement ring." So it's very important to how the image aids in building up this frame or situation. And also frame-based, where the image is essential. We have Trump on the right-hand side, also the famous actor, Harry Potter, etc. Then we have discourse image contradictions, the photograph on the left and the comments, the photograph in the middle and the text, and the photograph on the right-hand side and the text. We have this kind of absurd, incongruous combination of text and image. Then we have discourse-based, in this case, playing with similar pronunciations of myself and myself, or algorithms, etc. But there doesn't seem to be any relationship or any part for the image in this. Also, the images of Kant and Handel aid in getting the discourse-based incongruities. And also, finally, the ones in which the image is essential to play with the discourse interpretation of the meme. Notice how the Muslim guy on the left makes one interpretation of covered more likely and relevant than any other, and then we get the invalidation at the bottom. And similarly, the angry-looking guy on the right-hand side makes one interpretation of beating much more relevant and accessible, which is then invalidated at the bottom of the meme. So this is in this proposal I did in 2018. Then I published that in a 2021 paper. I analyzed 150 memes, and then you can see on the left-hand side the percentages of appearances of these 7 kinds of incongruity resolution in memes. And then in this year, Carmen Maiz Arevalo, we applied this classification to incongruity resolution in COVID memes. What we did is we selected again 150 memes. We made a table showing whether it's text-based or text-image or image only, what kind of incongruity, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. What contextual information is required to interpret the meme correctly, divided into COVID-related or general context, and also some comments on the main source of humorous effects resulting from meme comprehension. So eventually, so this is the percentages. In blue, you have the COVID-related memes on the right-hand side. And of course, we don't have time for a full analysis of that, but we can get some very nice conclusions, rough general conclusions from this. One is that there are twice as many memes that do not require incongruity resolution strategies for their effectiveness. That's probably because simply sharing COVID-related information is enough to trigger the desired effects. Secondly, you can see that there are far more frame-based memes whose humor is based on clashes with previous frames or frame construction or situation constructions, especially related to frames or general frames of pre-pandemic lifestyle. And predictably also, there are far less memes whose humor is based on meme discourse interpretation. On most occasions, frame-based memes suffice for humorous effects. So if we go back, so this is, I mean, obviously we need far more detailed analysis, but we can see, broadly that there is a difference in terms of what kind of humor is achieved, accomplished through COVID memes compared to normal everyday memes. So concluding, the idea is concluding remarks, I think the efficiency of COVID-19 memes entails much more than simply interpreting the meme discourse for the derivation of humorous effects. I think most of the massive appeal of COVID-19 memes comes from non-coded propositional and non-propositional information, which is assumed, is revealed, is emphasized, etc., etc., etc. This information stems from a number of elements. I have talked about 5 of them, probably there are more, that make these memes particularly effective in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. On paper, this information from these factors may converge, may overlap, may complement one another in the derivation of the desired effects and validation. And finally, I think that what is important here is basically the sharing of information, especially the mutual awareness of sharing this information. The idea of that we have, a collective or mutual acknowledgement of the mutuality of certain assumptions, the existence of social frames being invalidated, the activation of certain implicated premises, etc. So if we go back to the initial chart that I showed you at the beginning of this lecture, it's all about sharing the pain of being in the pandemic, sharing the longing of our former lifestyle, sharing awareness of collective information in terms of cultural, social representations, sharing fatigue effects and emotion triggered by COVID meme use, and finally sharing the mutual awareness of context accessibility in terms of implicated premises that allow for the derivation of implicated conclusions. So this is it. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Hughes, for your very interesting and also illuminating presentation, which I think has opened our eyes to a number of aspects of meme interpretation. Some of which I think we might have thought about as meme users, but definitely your analysis helps us see the pragmatic mechanisms behind them. I think there is some time for questions, and if there are any questions from the audience, please, raise your hand or just put on your mic and start speaking in, because I might not see. Okay, so there's a question from Daniel Sachs. Hello, Daniel. What is your question or comment?
Hello there. Thanks, Agnieszka, for organizing this. Francisco, thanks once again for such a lucid and educational talk. I had one thing in the back of my mind, which perhaps I'll be able to ask in the form of a question. And that is what emerges from your talk for me is that we have a kind of a background of normal pre-COVID meme communication. And now we've seen something not completely different, but significantly different in this one particular case of COVID-19, especially during the heat of the pandemic. And my question to you is this: to what extent do you think that these additional elements on the cognitive environment side, there's a lot of things that we suddenly shared cross societies, cross classes, cross many different generations, and so on and so forth, as well as on the social side, this need for the social benefits of communication for communication's sake. To what extent do you think you'd be able to find something that would, are these two completely isolated forms of meme communication, or are there middle cases? The question that sort of presents itself. Are there smaller events shared by smaller societies that you might be able to compare whether to the extent that something is as massive as the pandemic that is heading in the same direction.
I wouldn't talk about a radical change of meme communication. What I would meaning is that we all have this feeling that COVID-19 memes were used differently or with expectations of different effects than normal meme communication entailed. That, you know, apart from making people laugh, I think that we have all this idea of information, not coded, non-coded information, non-explicit information is there, for the sake of people's full awareness, you know, to share this kind of thing. But of course, I would talk about, you know, some not a radical change, but some additional features that allows us to explain why we have this feeling that COVID-19 means were differently used or with different purposes or with different outcomes, etc. I think there might be, and it might be useful to do that, and there might be some different ways of using them in terms of generations, whether the young used them differently, what motivations made young people long for a connection or not, or were suffering the lack of or the change of lifestyle as much as older people did. So that's I think there's a lot of room for research there, apart from this general, let's say, general schema of what this might be all about. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. There is another question, I think, from Eva. Switch on your mic, Eva. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so very much for this really interesting presentation, because it made me aware of a very interesting mechanism that, you know, I was in the middle of this and I wasn't fully aware of this. It's actually at the moment when COVID resulted in this kind of a divisiveness, yes, of nations, yes. And when we saw the world all of a sudden dividing itself into those zones, you know, there are safety, and that those zones were getting to be smaller and smaller, you know, because we, by the end of the day, ended up, you know, within our small apartments, within families, you know, so the circles were becoming smaller and smaller. And then what you pointed out, that actually a way of reacting against this, that was through the internet. And you know what, this is brilliant, because that what you pointed out, that it was actually not internet only, but, you know, all kinds of means of communication, and that it was our kind of a psychological savior, you know, and that is, it's way beyond therapeutic, you know, it's really, I think you put your finger at something absolutely brilliant, you know, which, and honestly, I really didn't realize that much. Now I have that. So I think it's very, very interesting. And another thing that I wanted to ask you is about, you know, that, you know, the kind of a difference, you know, have you investigated this, how those memes were changing, you know, the moment we're getting further and further away from the outbreak of the pandemic. So for example, now we are at this stage of kind of a pandemic fatigue, you know, when it's beyond even surprising and it's beyond shocking, because that was the way of reacting to this. So would you like to comment on this? Have you seen any change? I don't know. I'm not so sure if.
Well, yeah, well, that's super
because
interesting.
That's, you know, it's a way, you know, how helpful is humor at the time when we're kind of tired with something, you know?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I think that when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking, especially in the lockdown time in between March and May in Spain, in which this kind of non-propositional effect in terms of bonding, connection, solidarity, we are all suffering this, we all long for a formal lifestyle, was so necessary and so welcome by people. Now I have, as you say, I have noticed that now this kind of meme is not as effective, or does not trigger as many effects as they did initially, because basically, mostly because some people think this is over when actually it's not, and because we have come back to sort of, at least in Spain, to a sort of back to normal life, which means that COVID-19 memes, instead of triggering these nice effects in people, are actually a reminder of something unwelcome. So that's that's pretty it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the moment, I can't see any more hands, but I also have a question, comment, if I may, because actually this idea of the healing power of humor, where does it come from? And I think your analysis sheds light exactly on this element. This has been mentioned by Eva as well, right? But like the observation that the source of humor is not so much incongruity or the resolution of incongruity, because very often there is no resolution, right? Because we cannot, there is no twist, that the situation lingers. There is COVID and there is humor about COVID, so there is no resolution. But this realization of mutuality and that you are not alone is this a key factor in triggering humor. And I think the more so in COVID-related memes than in any other situation, because COVID was precisely about isolating people.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So, yes, so perhaps the healing power is exactly there. And what you've just said, that this effect kind of has worn out, because I also think psychologically there's a time when you want to share and there is a time when you don't want to share. That sort of this kind of sharing and realization that it's so widespread. You just don't want to think.
Exactly. So there is a progression in which humor is not as effective, just as Eva was pointing out so nicely before. Yeah, I think so. I think I quite agree with that. But at the time, at the lockdown, when we were all forced to remain at home between March and May 2020, that was so useful to remind people of shared assumptions about what's going on. That's why they were massively exchanged and shared on social media and messaging apps. And this is what I think is a possible, hopefully a possible explanation to why we have this feeling that COVID-19 memes were different from simply producing humor as other memes do, or criticism as political memes do. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. Are there any more questions or comments? As I said, I'm useless as a Zoom user, so I may not be able to see the raised hands or something. So if there are any more comments, please feel free just to put on your mic and speak.
The people overwhelmed with
Oh, maybe yes. There's a feeling because, like the presentation was just complete from the very start till the conclusion. So I understand that. Maybe we just got the message in its completeness. So we are just fully satisfied. So if that is the case, I would like to thank you very much once again. Francisco, and well, I enjoyed this talk very, very much, and I'm sure we all have. So thank you, and well, we just hope to be able to continue the discussion on humor. And
thank you, Agnieszka, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. I'm so sorry not to be there, because that's the best part, no? Having something to eat, having some talk in person.
Yes.
Well, we'll go back to that. We'll get back to that in the.
Yes. So that's what I was trying to say, that this maybe the frame, the external frame, will change soon enough, so we'll be able to continue our discussion in a more relaxed environment, and really it will become more theoretical than just really practical. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming to see me today.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.